Good evening all. Welcome to this edition of the webinar on new education policy in higher education. We have today very distinguished panelists. All the three people need no introduction, but as a moderator, it is my duty to introduce each one of them to you. Professor K. Kasturirangan, a Padma Vibhushan awardee and former chairman of the Indian Space Research Organization, who is also the chairman of the drafting committee of the National Education Policy, is here with us today. Professor Kasturirangan is at present the Chancellor of Central University, Rajasthan. He holds several other distinguished posts. He is the chairman of the governing board, Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics, chairperson of NIIT University, member, Atomic Energy Commission, emeritus professor, National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore, and honorary distinguished advisor, Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO. As chairman of ISRO, he oversaw India's space program between 1994 and 2003. He was a member of the Rajya Sabha from 2003 to 2009, and then a member of the erstwhile Planning Commission of India, 2009 to 2014. More recently, between July 2017 and December 2018, he was the chairman of the committee that drafted the new national education policy. He is a member of all 4 national science academies and several international academies. He is the only Indian to be conferred the honorary membership of the International Academy of Astronautics, besides being its vice president between 2003 and 2005. He has won several awards, including the Brock Medal in 2004, Alan D. Emil Memorial Award in 2004, Theodore von Karman Award in 2007, and Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Award in 1983. He's been conferred the highest civilian honors, the Padma Shri in 1982, Padma Bhushan in 1992, and Padma Vibhushan in 2000 by the President of India. The Rajotsava Prashasti in 2014 from the Government of Karnataka, and the award of Officer of the Legion d'Honneur 2002 by the President of French Republic, France. Professor Kasturirangan is a member of the governing board of Sai University and will be the lead speaker of today's seminar. Welcome, Professor Kasturirangan. We have with us Mr. K.V. Ramani, founder Chancellor of Sai University, a very successful technology entrepreneur and a philanthropist. He is among the pioneers who co-founded NASSCOM, the National Association of Software and Service Companies, in 1988. He has helped promote IT industry and entrepreneurship in India. He has contributed to the design of Tidal Park in Chennai and founded the Chennai chapter of the Indus Entrepreneurs and has served on the board of directors of ELCOT for a few years. Welcome, Mr. Ramani. Professor Jamshid Barucha, Vice Chancellor of Sai University. He is the founding Vice Chancellor of Sai University. Has a wide experience ranging around 40 years in academic career. It spans a range of distinguished institutions, starting at Dartmouth College. He has served as Associate Dean, Deputy Provost, and then Dean of Faculty of Arts and Sciences. He has served as Provost and Senior Vice President at Tufts University, where under his leadership, research volume doubled and avenues for technology transfer increased tenfold. At Cooper Union in New York, he is President Emeritus. He was a fellow at the Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University. Welcome, Professor Barucha. So the topic today, as you all know, is the National Education Policy. This was drafted in 2020. And Professor Kasturirangan, I know you probably heard a lot of people ask you a lot of questions about this. Some of them were argumentative, some of them have been to provoke you, and some have been downright very interesting questions. I also have my own set of questions here. And I would like to start with the first question to you on the spirit of this national education policy. It's coming after a gap of 30 years. So I would like you to actually start telling us where exactly do you think this is going to take India? And we've already spoken about the salient points. You've spoken again and again, but I think you can please reiterate them again.
Thank you, Sujata, for those kind words. First of all, I should thank the Sai University, particularly Mr. Ramani, the Chancellor and founder, who invited me to this unique experience today evening. And of course, I should mention that I came to know of Ramani personally only in the recent months. But I think it has left an indelible impression. And it's going to be now a permanent feature of anything adventurous, visionary, and things of that. When I think of it, I will always think of Ramani. And I am really privileged that I came to know of him, even though a little bit late in my life. So thank you, Ramani, for calling me, inviting me, and then asking me. I knew that I had a little pressure this week, but I don't think the persuasive power of Ramani is so dominating that there is very little I can do once he says you have to come. And here I am. And there are, of course, many other personalities who are a part of the governing board. Yes, I think he invited everybody who has, and anybody who has invited, I think they are there. Narayana Murthy is there. Justice Venkatachalaya is there, Mohan Das Pai is there, and many others. So this university certainly is packed at the top with some of the best minds in this country in education. And I think obviously when they chart out something for this university in the coming years, you know what its results can be. Each one of them is a great achiever in their own area, whether it is foundation of an Infosys system, whether the topmost standards for justice, or an economist with a wide-ranging interest in university systems and other areas of investments, Mohan Das Pai, each one of them stand out in this country. And they are all there in the university. I don't think that it can have any other track than the one that is dreamt by Ramani. He wants to bring this university and make it the Stanford of the East. I think in the coming years, I am sure Stanford will be proud to call that we would like to be like the Stanford of the East, at the Stanford itself, the real Stanford as it is today.
Thank you, sir.
Vice Chancellor, Professor Jamshid Barucha, of course, I came to again know of him very recently, a very accomplished academic, cognitive neuroscientist, as was mentioned by Sujata. He teaches in the United States, but he has agreed to spare his time to organize this university. I think nobody could be better than him with this experience, background, and his directions and vision. Nobody can be better than him than Professor Bajuja. So I'm so happy that he is here today, participating in this as a panelist. And it is also very nice to see. Always, I feel very proud when this kind of functions are also, there is a collaboration with the well-known and erudite publication, The Hindu. I have a great respect for Hindus in my childhood days. It's one of the finest reporting systems in this country, objectivity and so on. And I'm also privileged to know NROM in several contexts. And therefore, my special respect, and I'm sure that their association with this program certainly is a great value addition. Now, Sujata has asked, coming back to this question, about the spirit of the policy coming after 30 years. Yes, this is a policy that comes after 30 years, certainly. It is something which is witnessing major changes since the last policy was enunciated. And you know, many things, whether it is in the social front, in the economic front, whether it is in the science and technology front, many other areas, the societal changes has occurred. So obviously, I think the knowledge spectrum that we need to look for in this period, and especially into the later part of the 21st century, certainly is very, very different from the kind of things that we have so far been following based on the last 30 years of efforts, based on a policy which was enunciated 30 years back. So the important thing is the spirit of the policy, I think, if I understand Sujata correctly, is something which is in some sense time agnostic. I think if I have to start the policy's enunciation, I think it's good to say something which should stand the test of time. So I would assume that when you want to enunciate the spirit of the policy, you are really looking to start with a few of the principles that will govern, and it have a timeline much more than the kind of time frames in which many elements of the policy itself will relevant or need to be changed. So what I will do is in the next few minutes, I'll first go through a set of small set of principles which govern this policy, as was thought of by my colleagues, the committee members, as well as others who advised us, some of the very eminent educationists. The first principle is that the purpose and aim of education is what energizes the entire education system. Proper understanding of these purposes and aims leads to clarify I'm sorry, just 1 minute.
Yeah, sure.
Clarify all the elements of education. This policy clearly commits to the development of good human beings, a good society, and a strong and vibrant nation as the aim and purpose of the education. Something time agnostic, I would like to say. The word good here implies that the individual has the capacities to think independently and deeply, to engage in fellow human beings with empathy and compassion, the ethical capacities to reason right from wrong, good from bad, and to be economically independent and productive. Good society is one which is truly living our constitutional values, is just, is humane, and has a vibrant culture rooted in the Indian ethos. The next principle is the education is a public good. A strong and high quality public education system is the bedrock and energizer of a vibrant democracy. NEP is deeply committed to this. Literacy and numeracy, the very basis of learning for education, and the policy has outlined many steps towards achieving this goal. This is another important aspect of this. Next key principle is to develop values, skills, capacities, and knowledge that are relevant not just for today, but for the rapidly changing world of tomorrow. We must demolish the hierarchy and hard separation between subjects. We must see knowledge as an integrated whole, as it actually is, and understand its relationship and use to the world around us. Above all, the policy has ensured that the regulation, structuring, and design of our system must be enabling, empowering, and energizing. It must not be interfering and inspectorial. Further, quality follows equity and inclusion, which will also drive the transformation of the quality of the entire system. World over, the experience and research indicates that quality will happen if equity is made to happen, but not vice versa. Last, but not the least, the most important operating principle for the education system is the principle of trust. The policy is based on and intends to develop a culture of trust in the entire education system. Because without trust, there is no empowerment, there is no energy, and there is no ownership. Therefore, whether we look at the policy's regulatory architecture, or we look at the curricular approach, or we look at the institutional autonomy, it is all guided by trust. Such trust comes with concomitant accountability for all institutions and individuals. The principle of trust is simply that people, when trusted, will not only do the right thing, but will also do it in the best of their ability, and will then be willingly accountable for their actions, including rigorous public scrutiny. Inspiring such action and behavior is what will truly transform Indian education, and that is what will transform India. I'm happy to recognize the very intense discussion we had on these principles and approaches enunciated here during the first meeting of the governing board of this university. I do remember most of the members talking about many of these principles, the value system that they bring in, and the type of thing that the university, the Sai University should subscribe to. So I'm happy to repeat this aspect in the context of the first discussions that we had about the university itself, and that they recognize as these value systems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Actually, we have lots of questions already. So before I go to the next question that I have for you, here's one person who's asked, how can you ensure an inclusive education in higher education through NEP?
Well, inclusive education is something which is not only for higher education, but all across the spectrum of our policy. We have discussed the question of how do you bring in the inclusive education. With specific response to higher education, we have looked at specific issues which need to be brought as something which is one is related to the geographies, the developments, and the kind of provision that we need to make. I'm sorry because there is some problem with the connection. Okay,
sure.
I'll come back to this. What I want to say is that there is always this question of making sure that the different segments of the society are taken note of in the context of several aspects of the policy. We have made those observations with respect to the undergraduate education. We have done this with respect to the vocational education. We have done this with respect to research. What do we need to provide as special dispensations to ensure equity and also the spread of the education to the different segments of the society? I'm happy to say that this is one of the areas that we discussed quite in substantial areas, and we also have brought in this aspect in the context of private sector, the investments from various other agencies, and finally also with respect to the kind of hostels, these are minor details, but we have not overlooked these aspects of the support that we need to give to the segment of the society that needs it for higher education. And in fact, I am very much aware of the fact that Ramani has often told me, even for Sai University, there will be a very special dispensation for those who cannot afford higher education, but who should be given a higher education because of their merit. The necessary provision will be made in terms of financial support and many other type of support. This is the spirit of the policy. So it is all across the different elements of the education that we have ensured that this kind of equity is brought in the education.
Thank you, sir. So here, this is one question that I had for you. The nature of policy as an interconnected one touching on all phases of education, from school to higher education to research. How do you actually get students in school to become to be more research oriented? Is it possible at all? Would this policy address that?
Yes, so certainly, Sujata, I think that's a very important thing, because you will appreciate that the reality of education is that it is seamless, continuous process right from birth and all through the life. The policy therefore provides an integrated yet flexible approach to education. It has kept the interconnectedness of the various phases of education in mind, and how the same will enable continuity, coherence, and processes to ultimately realize an end-to-end educational roadmap for the country. Advances in developmental, cognitive, and educational psychology have considerably influenced our thinking about how we need to address the teaching learning processes of the youngsters in their early childhood. The expanded 5+3+3+4 structure of school education is based on our better understanding of the scientific basis for the child's learning trajectory from birth to secondary school. In this context, the first three stages of the child's education, that is foundational, preparatory, and middle, defined in conformity with the developmental process of the child, namely transition from perceptual learning to conceptual learning and then on to prescriptive learning and abstraction, are taken into account. The distinction between curricular, extracurricular, and co-curricular, as well as arts, sciences, and vocational subjects are done away with, which is a major step in making the education holistic. It is this integrated, holistic, liberal education that is required for a capable citizen of tomorrow. And you said specifically with respect to the research, designing such a curriculum will seamlessly enable the transition of a student to higher education, where the policy is transforming all undergraduate education with similar principles of holistic, multidisciplinary, liberal education. I may mention that early phase of the school education itself, independent thinking, creative thinking, originality, teamwork, and things of that kind have become integral part of the training that a youngster receives. This, coupled with the holisticity of education in the subsequent phase, prepares the child for taking up advanced research, and that is precisely what we have done in the policy. So in particular, the policy aims at the development of the 21st century skills, as I said, while giving enough flexibility or choices consistent with the dynamics of a knowledge society.
Thank you, sir. So here is one person who's asked, it's specifically for Professor Kasturi Rangan. And she says, I'm curious to know what advantages liberal education were seen by the committee due to which it was included in NEP.
Yes. I would like to say something specific about the, the knowledge is a integrated system in the current understanding of what a knowledge is. As Einstein said, a knowledge is all types of knowledge, whether it's arts, it is science, engineering, humanities, they are all part of the same tree, which essentially means they are integral, they are interconnected. And if you want to understand the basis of anything that you want to understand, you need to address it in the context of all its manifestation, which is the different facets of the knowledge, whether it is science, whether it is arts, whether it is humanities, whether it is engineering, whether it is medicine. So you need to bring in the knowledge to integration at some level, at some stages. So this is exactly what we are trying to provide. It helps you to develop not only your intellectual capacity, I want to say this, but it also helps you to develop many of the other faculties, which is an integral part of it, which things like the aesthetics part of it, the creativity part of it, and many other things. In fact, I should say that these aspects of this and the kind of liberal education that we are talking of, I should say, is not something which is alien to this India's culture. You know this right from Banabhata's work in the 12th century. We have this kind of a thing, an integrated study of all the subjects to be a learned person. This is precisely what we have done. The whole idea is to prepare the child for the 21st century skills on one side, to develop a holistic understanding of the knowledge that he is supposed to master, and thereby prepare the child through the holistic education, through the liberal education, to prepare for various types of dynamical changes that happens in the knowledge spectrum, and be able to assimilate, learn to learn, as you call it, is all part of this kind of a strategy that the policy provides.
Thank you, sir. I have a question for you here, sir. Transformatory nature of school education for its own credentials to provide career opportunities and also as a stepping stone to higher education. So we are talking about children, when you in school, hardly any child has any idea what it's going to do when it comes to college. So probably, and I hear more and more from even directors of institute that students come into the university or into the college system with little idea of what their career is going to be, probably 4 years or 5 years down the line. And this includes even students who go to institutions such as IIT. And I am told, some people have told me, so what, the child is just learning. So 17 to 21, the 4 years that he or she spends at the institute is just a time to learn. It is okay if they change track after they move out of the institution. So I have a question here. I know it is okay for anybody to change track at any time in life, but is there a way that some children are totally glued to their the path that they have decided on? Does the NEP also look at all these aspects?
Yes. I think the one important thing we should recognize that NEP, it's a school part of the education in the initial phases. You know, I said about the 5+3+3+4. I also said about the perspective to conceptual to the final ability to understand the abstract nature of the knowledge as some of the phases in which the child go through. The important thought we have recognized is the fact that there have been several developments in the cognitive science, neural sciences, which gives an idea of the type of brain growth for the child. Now, this brain growth for the child happens almost 85 to 90% of the brain growth happens by the age of 8. So the policy has addressed this aspect by creating the foundational, the preparatory, middle, and the final, secondary, keeping in mind the developmentally appropriate aspect of the education in this way. This is the one that equips the child to, by the time it comes through the schooling education, for the transformation and the corresponding the ability, depending on the development of the brain of the child, to provide the necessary confidence to pick up subjects across the spectrum. In fact, I did mention that this kind of a thing, you come for the last 4 years, you have already an option to take up several types of subjects depending on your interest. In fact, the ability to choose your interest and the subject at the secondary level is well prepared for the developmental capability when we addressed it in the 5+3+3. So 5+3+3 really leads you for the child's ability to really pick up what it wants to be. This can be a vocational education if you want to stop your education at the level of the higher secondary school. It can be to the higher education if you want to do that.
Is it mine?
I think we just wait. I think Professor Kasturanga has had a pause.
Yeah, something has gone wrong with this.
Just give him a minute for him to rejoin, please.
Okay, so I suggest that we continue until Professor Kasturangan is back. Mr. Ramani, can you just speak a little bit about what you think is the higher education status in India, and whether you can we can look at what's happening currently and how you are planning to change the situation?
Yeah, my question is that I would have preferred to speak after Professor Kasturangan has completed.
Yeah, when he comes back, we'll actually go back from, we will start where we left off.
Okay, so in the interest of keeping the time of everybody let me just say there's one thing that is we just first are going to ask one question for everybody to ponder in the meantime. It's now the 75th year of India's independence. We have more than 1,000 universities in India and several tens of thousands of colleges in this country. Let's just take higher education and the university education. Why is it that after 75 years of independence, we do not have even one university, the top 100 of the world global ranking? That's my simple question of higher education in India. We do not have any university. There are two international rankings, the Times of the US ranking and the QS ranking from Europe. And in either of the ranking, there's no university in the top 100 in the world from India. If you see the IITs, they come between 125 and 150. We see the private universities, they come between 200 and 700 or far beyond. Professor Rangan is back.
Yes, back. Yes, sir. Sorry, sir. Please continue, sir.
I'm extremely sorry. The power went off and then again to catch it back. Hello, can you hear?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Sujata,
Please
can you just come now to a point where you would be pick it up?
Yes. So you were saying that the 5+3+3 system leads a child. It prepares a child to pick up a subject and proceed and make decisions on its own.
Correct.
Whether it wants to go into vocational course or whether it wants to become a professional, whatever it wants to.
That's right. So this is taken. That is why the connectivity. Of course, there are still discussions on whether some bridge courses are necessary or not, but that will all disappear as we further refine this strategy. But as of now, it is planned to make sure that you have a school education, which is a 15-year school education, which is most comprehensive and will provide you opportunities to leave the school education for a profession and also prepare you. Right.
1 second. Did you say 15 years of school education?
Pardon? Hello?
15 years.
It's a 15-year of school education.
We now have 12 years. That's why I was confused.
No. That's why I said 5 plus 3
3
plus
plus
3 plus 4.
Okay.
Right. That is the thing. Right.
But that just includes the preschool as well.
Okay.
Also, you must clarify that. It's not
right.
15 years.
It is the education starts at the age of 3.
3. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And then goes up to 18.
Yes.
And as I said, 5 years of foundation, 3 years of preparatory, 3 years of middle, and lastly 4 years of secondary.
Okay.
So the complete schooling at the age of 18.
Yes.
That's right. That's
okay.
right. But we don't have PUC and those kind of a thing.
Right.
And we don't have any kind of the curricular, extracurricular, co-curricular and things of that kind. And then you are allowed to explore at the secondary level your interest. So you can decide whether a vocational education is interesting to you or whether you're going to higher education. But these are all choices which is coming out of an understanding by the child of what he or she is looking for. That is the preparation we make in school, and that is the care we have taken in terms of the developmental trajectory of the brain and the corresponding school education, which goes along with that, so that this ability is built into the child's comprehension.
Okay, sir. Thank you. So here there are some people have asked a question here, sir. In terms of language, why is it so important? You're talking about local languages. Now, I understand, I as a person understand that, we need to have several, as a child, you can pick up languages when you're very young. And as you grow older, it is very difficult to learn languages. But people here, quite a few people have asked, why is this importance being given to local languages?
Well, I want to tell something about the language in the policy, just as a preamble to what you asked. The question of a language in the policy is one which covers several dimensions of language learning. The language learning is not purely a 2-language formula or a 3-language formula. Please understand that. So that is what today is boiling down to the language policy. To us, the language is a very critical means of communication, a means of communication for cultural integration and many other aspects into the language comes in. Now, second, the understanding of the language and the ability to pick up language starts almost as the child is born. So there are several ways in the child is able to develop its language capability. When you come to the third 3 years, when you are already your brain has started comprehending, from the earlier sign languages and so on, it starts getting to the vocal sounds and things of that kind. And slowly, the language that is spoken up for the first time by the child is the one where it converses with its mother. So that is first point we should understand. So the most familiar thing right in the beginning of its ability to pick up language, it comes from its local conditions within the house, its mother and others. Then comes the question of a local language, where there is more converts along the people who are around you, the local thing. And then you have, of course, the state language, it could be different. I am assuming that they are not the same. They can be the same, so there is no such further argument on this. Now, the important thing we should realize is the language comprehension is also something which the brain develops as a full capability by the age of 8 or 10. So if you try to train the brain with regard to picking up any language, is a means of communication, mind you, that need to be started sufficiently early. The brain has to be trained. There are locations, I'm sure Barucha will be able to tell us much better in this particular area. But the fact remains that there are locations where it is able to take up the language and learn it. And this is much faster, the early phase of the child's growth. So if we want to exploit this unique capability of a human being, you need to start teaching the language sufficiently early for the child so that it can pick up the language. And we have even found that, so it can even pick up 2 or 3 or 4 languages at that time, around from 3 years or 4 years onwards. So the whole idea is to take advantage of the developmental capability of the brain to learn more languages, which then becomes most useful for its career, for its growth, and for its life in the later part of the year. Yeah, and it so happens that if you have this brain developed through the language ability, then even in the later stages, if you want to study more languages, so you want to study Japanese at the age of 25, the early preparation has been invested in terms of a language pick-up ability for this. So the importance of the language is not purely a question of one language or 2 languages. The ability of the brain, timing, synchronizing it along with it, and create an ability for communication, which is very critical. Ultimately, language is an extremely important area for anybody to grow and professionally be successful. So that is the point on which we have tried to elaborate the language policy. We have said if you want, but the mother language is simply because it's so happy that even research would have seen that when even Nobel laureates, we have seen the interviews there, that they are able to think much better in their own mother tongue rather than trying to learn in English or in a foreign language. Now, this is again the characteristic of the brain and your ability to understand the cognitive science part of the brain. So there is an ability which is grown by the brain. It has to be exploited, it has to be nurtured, and it has to be enhanced. And that is exactly what the language proportion is. And the best language is the one that is around you. That is the one that child picks up. And there is also a proof now that that kind of a language is the best. When you think of ideas, when you think of phenomena, when you think of principles, you pick it up much better in your own mother tongue. You may even do it subconsciously, that when you learn something in English, your brain is already working on it with the local language and then giving you the secondary transformation into English. So these are the kind of complications. So I think the recognition through cognitive science, the ability for the child to pick up better and perform better through local languages and mother tongue, and the ability to learn more number of languages, and ultimately to make it successful in terms of learning more languages in future if that is needed, are all part of this decision making. And that is what this policy is.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. That was really comprehensive. And yes, I agree with you that, and it's so nice to know that so much thought has been invested in drafting this NEP, especially in terms of development of the brain. So, sir, here is one more thing. What is the focus on the uniqueness of undergraduate education in the new education policy?
Yeah. You know, the undergraduate education, one of the things that we have made sure about the educational system is that it should touch each and every citizen. I'm sure everybody will agree to this. An important policy shift in this connection with respect to the higher education is that the modern imperatives of a knowledge society. A holistic, multidisciplinary education, I mentioned about it, and the knowledge they are the branches of the same tree, as Einstein said, within a 4-year undergraduate program. Our present undergraduate program, if you really look at it, they would have, what is the policy there in the undergraduate? Simply have called for improving job readiness on day one. This policy recognizes that such an approach is dangerously out of step with a world that is rapidly changing. It recognizes that students must be given a much broader multidisciplinary foundation so that they can adopt and reinvent themselves. I mentioned it in a little different ways earlier, but I want to say this because it's so important. Reinvent themselves as necessary over their entire life. So when somebody says that we'll introduce this multidisciplinarity, this is the idea that we are recognizing the fact that they can adopt and reinvent themselves as necessary over their entire working life. The 4-year undergraduate program, this is what our recommendation is opportunity to explore their interests and develop a broad base. We need give enough time and enough opportunities for this. I also want to stress that the holistic aspect, which aims to develop all capacity, not just intellectual, I mentioned, but aesthetic, social, physical, emotional, and moral capacities, is an integrated manner to create a well-rounded individual. Such an approach is necessary to provide the kind of education that is required for the 21st century. Another unique aspect of undergraduate education is the principle of multiple entry, multiple exit, which has been envisaged as a mechanism for equity, for helping people who have been forced to drop out of education for economic and social reasons, especially children, women, to come back and complete their education in the later stage. The Academic Bank of Credit, the ABC, proposed by NAP 2020, promises to be a game changer because it will enable anytime learning, anywhere learning, and any level learning as envisaged in the NPV, thereby enabling everyone to be relevant to the needs of the hour, most importantly to the needs of the jobs. The combination of the multiple entry, multiple exit notions with the ABC mechanism will provide flexibility in making academic choices of courses and institutions and choosing the appropriate time in one's career to learn about what one wants with appropriate credits at all stages. It will facilitate the integration of the campuses and the distributed learning systems by creating student mobility within inter and intra-university system. The process does not rule out sharing of credits between public and private institutions. So this is the uniqueness of the undergraduate education. And one is liberal education, exit as you want and entry as you want. And all the 4 years of the undergraduate education, you can leave the first year with a certificate, you can leave the second year with a diploma, you can leave the third year with a degree, and you can have the fourth year along with the degree, a research degree, and which also qualifies you directly for going to PhD. So these are the other aspects of the undergraduate education.
Professor, I have a question here. I have been speaking to a lot of vice chancellors and heads of institutions.
Yeah.
So all of them have, quite a few. There's been no antipathy to the NEP, but they have concerns.
Yeah.
Their concerns, are like when students in most government colleges, whether it is Tamil Nadu or Assam or any part of the country, the really poor students who are in college, they have difficulty in accessing basic electronic mobile phones, which is what we need now in this pandemic. During this pandemic, they are not able to access education on their phones. So they are saying when this has been the case, how do you expect the vice chancellors to, the UGC has been telling the vice chancellors, please implement the NEP. Now they are struggling because at the grassroots level, when you have the Senate and the academic council, which actually meets probably twice a year, how do you carry the entire load of teachers who are in the grassroots, who are looking at students, who are looking at teachers? They have a problem in implementing the NEP, and they're saying we can't implement it at one go, but you need to give us time to implement it. So as the architect of the policy, I'm asking you how you
Yeah.
carry them
Let
forward.
me first of all tell you to you and to others, no great quantum jump in India's position in any activity is going to take place in 21st century without sweat and blood of all the people concerned. Let me be very clear. There is no easy way to achieve greater things. We have achieved quite a lot in the normal way. We need to now have to have quantum jumps, quantum leaps, and challenges there are of a very different scale. Let us understand, when we have to create a Martian mission, I know what it means for India to do that in the background of what other kind of challenges we face. So this is one example of the fact that the national education policy is not a cakewalk for people to get to the next level of higher education or next level of education and a knowledge society that we aspire to be. This is, I want to say this first because there is no easy way. The second question is that we have considered in the policy a very little idea, a very little issues. We are aware of the geographical imbalances, economic imbalances, the problem of developments which are more related to tribal and non-tribal and many other kinds of things. Each one of them provides a challenge with respect to the adopting of the national research education. Over and above this is the questions of the very differing standards of education that this country is facing in different locations and in different parts of the society. So I don't say that we have a clear-cut one shoe fits all kind of a solution for this. First and foremost is wherever it is possible for us to put this into operation, we are supporting them fully to make sure that that shows the proof of concept and also shows the way for others to adopt, number one. Number two, there are a set of systems which with a certain level of support could be further, it could be financial, it could be human resource, but then sharing it with other institutions and things of that kind. This is the second part of it also we have in mind. There are certain areas which need to have very challenging solutions which are much more involved. And this would mean that we need to create ways in which we do, which may not be exactly the type of thing that we have done with other approaches. Now, what I want to say is, so there is no clear, but we have recognized this. We have a 10-year time frame for transforming this the policy to the finally, and we have another 10 years to evaluate it. So we have totally a 20 year is a kind of a policy frame that time frame that we have set for ourselves. In this time frame, we think that we should be able to overcome it. There are many transformatory part of it where we need to get away from the old culture. And I want to say this also as one more element. The culture of the system need to undergo changes because there are many things on which you look at it with certain doubts with respect to because we are doing the ability to do this, the availability of funding, the availability of teachers. I think these are precisely the one that we are set to solve. We have to create institutional mechanism. If there is no such mechanism, we need to even set up the new ones. Where there is a mechanism which is not working, we have to correct it, and there has to be a resolve. And this resolve has to come from all levels, not only on the government level, not from the Ministry of Education alone, state level, at the institutional level, and ultimately also at the teachers level. So if you really look at the policy, you will see we have addressed this with respect to all these levels of institutional systems, which had to play a role in the national education policy. I don't think there's the easy way, but it is workable simply because of the fact that we have used the best of the people who know this educational part and who have undergone experiences which are very close to the kind of thing that we have recommended. These are not coming out of some outside ideas. These are all ideas which are on which there is a strong rationale and a strong basis. And there are several experiences in this country, although it is a little scattered, which have been carefully studied in trying to make these recommendations. So I think a 10-year time frame and a phased growth of evolution of this policy across the country is something which is well within the possibility of this country. We have done many other things with similar initial pessimism, but ultimately leading to optimism. And your own university and the Chancellor is one of those optimists. And I'm looking forward to how Sai will show the way in this kind of a thing. There are many such institutions, but I would like to use the example of Sai University itself and its vision to see how we can transform it. I am sure we can do that.
Thank you, Professor. Actually, you gave me the lead. I'm going to ask Mr. K.V. Ramani to tell us what exactly his university is planning to do in the coming years. Please, Mr. Ramani.
Yeah, as I was saying when Professor Rangan was off the screen for a while, I'm just going to make one or two points before I get on to the new education policy. My first question was to say that to provoke everybody to think that why is it that in 75 years of independence, we haven't got one international level university in our country. The topmost IITs come between 125 and 150. And we have 700 private universities, none of them in that level. How come we have not been able to transform education sector? We have transformed, let's say, IT sector to be a global leader. We transformed healthcare sector. Why have we not been able to transform education sector? That's a fundamental key to this policy. So in my mind, the new education policy is the transformation that's needed for education sector in this country. I'll give you a simple example. We have several times in the life of a nation, we come across opportunities to take a leapfrog. We jump several decades of technology into the latest. We just take, let's say, the telecom sector. We did not even have wired telephone lines at the village level, not even one booth at the village level. People had no connectivity at the village level telephone. They had only scattered around cities, urban or tier 2, tier 3 cities. But now we jumped into the mobile telephony so fast with the new adopted technology that today we see telephones being used in the length and breadth of the country because we skipped several generations of technology in between. The new policy came in, India adopted quickly, and we transformed the country very fast within a short span of time. Today, you can see that every part of the country has mobile connectivity. So here we have a platform, which is the new education policy, which is doing the same thing for education, school education, higher education, research, and all of that. We just have to jump and take the risk. It's going to be a lot of hard work, as Professor Kusturangan said. Nothing is going to be achieved by, I think it's easy. We have a transition policy, we work on a schedule, and think it is not going to be easy. There are going to be challenges because the country of diversity and plurality that India has is going to be taking time, it's going to be taking a lot of efforts and a lot of hard work. But if we put in all of the efforts and hard work required, I'm sure that we can transform education sector in India to be globally the best. Because don't forget, a few thousand years, 4,000 years ago, we are globally the best. And the rest of the world was living in caves or perhaps in nomads, in jungles. India has its ancient civilization which very few countries had around the world. India had its ancient civilization, Harappa, Nalanda, Takshashila, and in South Kiladi. We are having excavations which are several thousand years old, long before many of the countries on the planet Earth were born. And scholars from around the world were coming to India for acquiring knowledge. What happened to that India? Where did we lose it? Was it wiped away by a tsunami or what? It's all buried. Or we lost it. Now we're trying to go and get the technology and knowledge from the rest of the world. So my view, the new education policy is a transformation we need to restore education in India to the glorified level that we had in the past, but in the current context of technology, research, and so on, to bring in world-class technology to India. That is the number one on the policy, my views, and that's also the Sai University's views. And therefore, come back to your question. Coincidentally, or I must say Providence has it, that Sai University started about 3.5 years ago in concept. And Sai University, from the time we started, we have been having interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary education and the design level of the university from 2018. When we had our act passed as a private university, when we designed the university, we thought of it as interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary university. In fact, concurrently, without knowing Professor Kasturirangan, he and his team were doing the same work. We did not know Professor Kasturirangan at that time, as he said. But the beauty is that we have designed Sai University to have identical design of Sai University to the new education policy that is interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary. Just so that it's not just to say interdisciplinary in a concept level, but it's actual level. That Sai University will have students coming in from, of course, it's going to be from the higher education level. You can have students coming in from multidisciplinary approach. You can have, your majors and minors into across disciplines and arts and sciences, liberal arts, sciences, engineering, technology, management, law, health sciences. You could have your degree from multiple designs. You don't have to have one packaged unit that we have currently. Let's understand what is the reason why India lost its direction, in my view. How has the international universities succeeded? Internationally, universities have succeeded two fundamental designs. One fundamental design is large amounts of grants given by government to set up institutions of great eminence, but with minimal interference. Today, we have many government institutions governed like, we have a few equivalents of our own Ivy League, but not up to Ivy League standards in global level, but we have national level Ivy League schools. But they're funded by government and they're all doing a lot of good work, both in education and research. But the second, which is the private universities, you see internationally, the private universities have been largely set up by foundations and grants of wealthy families. You take any leading university in the US, for example, they've been set up by some large family with a huge foundation and given the freedom of the university to run and academic freedom for the university to implement without interfering in the management and the administration of the policy of the university, the administration policy, the curriculum, the research, and so on. That felt that the education was independent, whereas in India, education is dependent. Higher education is dependent. So the reason for that is higher education in India is driven largely as a business model. It is driven as a corporate model to say, what is my investment, what is the return on investment, what is my profit, what is the surplus generation, and how do we go, and so on and so forth. But Sai University has been conceived of in the global model to bring back education as a service. It's a key and fundamental difference. That is why we believe in NEP. Because in India, education is a service. We talk about ancient India, we had Gurukulam education. The Guru did not take fees from the student. Obviously, in modern India, you cannot run a university without fees, but you don't have to have a huge amount of profit objectives. The university has to generate surpluses to sustain its growth, to be able to sustain research, to support good faculty, international level infrastructure, conferences, speakers, and so on. Yes, but nobody takes money home from the university. That's the key question. So we're not seeing return on investment. We're not seeing education as a business. We're seeing education as service. And therefore, Sai University is uniquely positioned that we come into being as a new age university, and our design coincides with NEP design. So we want to be interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary university. We have already started 3 schools. We started a School of Liberal Arts and Sciences. We started a School of Computing and Data Sciences. We started a School of Law. And an undergraduate student today in Sai University can take courses from across 3 schools. And soon we'll have other schools, management schools, engineering, technology schools, healthcare schools, laws, several schools. The key is we don't want to put a student through a package of programs. If you take physics, you must take chemistry and mathematics. That's what Professor Kasturirangan is saying. Let them decide. And he's gone to the extent of saying, start that thinking at the school level. That's a visionary statement when the brain development actually happens. but we are thinking about implementing it at the higher education level. So let the student come in and say that, okay, you want to take a physics major, you want to take a minor in music, and maybe a minor in sports. As somebody said in the chat box, what is going to be the skills of future? We don't know. But we see inside university, if you take sports as a minor and health sciences as a minor or whatever in maybe related fields, you could perhaps be a sports person today. 10 years of active sports life, you could become a sports coach. Then maybe you could become a sporting manager, because that itself is a skill as a profession today. There are many professions that are emerging which did not exist 10 years ago. Therefore, Sai University is all about interdisciplinary multidisciplinary education. We'll be the first university in India, I'm glad to say, to implement the new education policy of Professor Kasturanga. We'll be the first education policy. As soon as the policy was announced, I wrote to the then Honorable Minister for Education to say, a letter to say, please include us as the #1 University of India to implement the new education policy. This was the year 2020. And we are actually implementing it today. We have launched our undergrad program. Professor Barucha will talk about more of the academics, but I'm staying away from it. The key is that combined with the launchpad Professor Kasturangan's new education policy has given, that we want to transform education sector like we transform IT sector, healthcare sector, telecom sector. And we believe that a student can have multiple disciplinary education, then multiple career paths open. They don't have to be stuck in one thinking silo approach to education and a silo approach to career. Just because you take computer science, you don't have to stay be an IT industry all your life. We are even courses on how to become an entrepreneur, how to become an effective communicator. So the skills that are required are not only academic skills, they're also skills which are, life skills. So to provide an opportunity for the student to learn all of the life skills and academic skills of their choice and build a career of their choice is the ultimate purpose of Sai University. And that's how we're implementing the new education policy. And I thank Professor Kastirangan and his team for effectively giving us a platform and show to the rest of the world, and in fact, the rest of India, that we are the cusp of a major transformation in education field. And Sai University will be the forerunner in demonstrating and implementing it with the help of Professor Barucha. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ramani. I would like Mr. Barucha to please come on. Somebody who has a lot of exposure as a neuroscientist and somebody who studied music as a minor in his college days. With his vast experience, he's joined Sai University. Professor Barucha, please, I'd like to hear from you. You're going to talk something on freedom of knowledge. And so please do.
Thank you. Thank you, Sujata. Thank you, Dr. Kastirangan. Thank you, Mr. Ramani. And thank you all for signing on today. The NEP clears the way for new universities in India to take that quantum leap that Dr. Kastirangan talked about. That is very much part of why I decided to return to India after 40 plus years, because I think right now, right here, is the greatest opportunity in anywhere in the world, and certainly I think in India's modern history, to make a country a center of learning. India is now exporting the brains, providing the brains of the world in many respects. When I was a kid in India, there was not access to knowledge. There wasn't access to, it was a poor country and so on. And there are still those issues, but there's no shortage of access to knowledge now. And we've demonstrated that there's an enormous amount of talent. And because of our youth population, not only is there a potential youth dividend, but we have to act now to give those youth the platform from which to determine the future. we, as the grown-ups, the adults, the teachers, the professors, the parents, the leaders in higher education, in many ways have failed our children by presuming that we know what they should learn, what they should not learn, and what ideas and skills are going to fuel the growth of the economy and the vibrancy of the culture in the future. I am absolutely certain that the economic growth in the remaining part of this century and the new cultural innovations and richness will not come from anything that we are teaching our students today. It'll come from them. It'll come from each student out there. It'll come from the Rishita Mathuras. It will come from other students. And that's because the traditional education system has underestimated the tremendous learning power of the brain. I come at this as a cognitive neuroscientist. I was delighted to hear Dr. Kasturi Rangan talk about the brain being important to this. We are designing Sai University on the basis of research on how the brain learns in the context of its environment and how we shape that environment to maximize that process. When we talk about a teacher, when we talk about a curriculum, when we talk about a campus, all of these are simply elements of that environment that we want to provide for students' brains to achieve their maximum potential. That is an extremely important lesson that comes from research in cognitive neuroscience. It's really the difference between harnessing innate talent versus stifling it. The traditional model was, in my view, much more of stifling, more don'ts than, okay, let's go with what you seem to be interested in, but let's give you a polish, let's refine your skills, let's refine your ability to express those passions in ways that are going to be maximally productive. It's really like scouting talent and then coaching and managing the talent rather than preaching or rather than being pedantic. That is really, once you see the idea, it's kind of obvious. And I always use this example of when my wife and I had our child. I promised myself that when he starts asking why, but why, but why not, but why, you give him reasons and then he'll challenge those reasons. He'll want deeper reasons. That I would never, ever, unless the house was on fire, I would never brush him off. I will never say, just be quiet. I would never say, that's not relevant. I would never say, you're too young. That's because the learning comes from inside out. The child pushes against the world, tests it, manipulates it, challenges it, and depending upon what comes back is how it learns. And when I say what comes back, I mean including from parents and teachers, campuses, and peers, and all of these things. Now, the NEP, as I read it and I've said, is one of the reasons that I made this commitment to return to India, because as I read it, and thank you to Dr. Kasturi Rangan and his colleagues, it just set off these bulbs in my brain. I was just in sheer delight that finally modern India, which had inherited its higher education system from the British, had modified it in some ways, but had not really kept up with the changes in the world. It was time now for India to innovate in education and start from first principles. The beauty and the privilege of being involved in starting a new university is, as Dr. Kasarunangan said, there's very little baggage. Now, there's still a lot of baggage. There is cultural baggage, there's regulatory baggage. It's very difficult to change people's expectations. But I think, as Mr. Ramani knows, when anybody says we have to do this in creating the university, I say, why do we have to do that? And they say, but sir, that's how it's done. And I say, that's not a reason. That's not a reason for doing it this way. So much of what we've done in education at all levels is simply carryover from tradition. One example is the strict division of knowledge into subjects or disciplines. Now, this was a very powerful idea that came into being in the 19th century when knowledge was exploding so fast and rigorous methods were developing so quickly that there was a need to compartmentalize it. Okay? So it has served a very useful purpose. This is history. That is philosophy. That is mathematics. That is something else. That is biology. But since that time, knowledge, the exponential expansion of knowledge has blasted through those boundaries. I can tell every student today, I can promise you, the big Nobel Prizes, the big innovations, the successful startup companies, the successful NGOs, the breakthroughs in solving the world's problems, not a single one is going to come from simply diving deeper into an established subject. It's going to come from sparking the contact points where music contacts computer science. When I was a kid and I would talk about those two subjects, people would say, but you have to choose. They don't have anything to do with each other. And I knew they did. Well, today, as every child here knows, almost all the music we listen to is digital. So that was a marriage of computer science with music, which is an art. And the examples are plentiful. That needs to happen in public health, where we need to marry our knowledge about data science with our need to improve the public health infrastructure in this country. Data is going to be critical. That's where the big quantum leaps are going to come from. Now, we're short of time, so I want to just make a few more points about what makes Sai University unique in India in the context of NEP. First of all, we focus more on fundamental cognitive skills than on specific subject knowledge. Now, I'm not saying subject knowledge is not necessary. It is. But at the undergraduate level, I think the biggest payoff to professional success, personal fulfillment, and national advancement and global advancement is if those critical years, still of adolescence, when the brain is still very impressionable, are used not to shove things down students' throats, have them mug it up and spit it back in exams, but rather to let them learn how to fly and fly to the best of their ability. So I would say our education should be to harness talent, not to stifle it. That is really encapsulated in what is called active learning in cognitive neuroscience. And active learning, there are lots of pieces to active learning. So I want to expound on it. Clearly, experiential learning is an example of active learning, but it really means that we learn much more powerfully by expressing ourselves and testing what comes back to us than by simply sitting in a classroom and being lectured at uh, and being told things. Now, of course, lecturers will continue to play an important role, and I'm doing that right now. So, but it's we need to move the balance to a much more interactive and active mode of learning. So, project-based, even our international programs at Sai University are going to be totally unique. Of course, we will have semester abroad, but we are going to put in place a whole menu of international immersion opportunities, even shorter durations of 2 weeks, or project-based learning where students get embedded in international projects. And of course, some of those could be virtual, where they get connected with students at other parts of the world to form project teams. And so we've attracted to Sai University a real leader in this kind of experiential international education named Sherman Teichman. And he is going to teach a revolutionary course in our first semester at Sai called Global Challenges or Global Issues, which is based on a model that he developed called the colloquium model. Instead of having the textbook and a single professor takes the students through from this to that, he brings in thought leaders, and the undergraduate students get to interact with people who are actually out there changing the world. And so our first year students, by the time they finish their first year, are going to be plugged into more powerful international networks to figure out how to continue their passions than any graduate of any 3 or 4 year college in the country. We're going to use that colloquium model also outside of the international arena in our very first semester in a series we call the Frontiers series, where students get exposed to what are the big issues of our time. What are the big challenges and opportunities of our time? The idea is to inspire, to spark the imagination, and give the students about a year to figure out, okay, now what do I really want to do? Now I can start to take the more advanced courses. I'll give you an example. I loved physics from the very youngest years. And we went through the physics curriculum in school and so on and so forth. But it's only long after I was a grown-up and I was a professor, I'm not a professor in physics, that I learned about quantum entanglement. And I watch these videos and I think, how did I miss out on these big, juicy ideas? And people, well, it's too advanced. Well, it's not. In the age of TED lectures and videos, some of the researchers who are themselves making these discoveries have started trying to explain these things in ways that can be exciting to a general educated audience. So I want our students to approach knowledge from the building blocks, which is the traditional way, as well as from the excitement of the big issues. And each week, students will get different speakers who talk about big issues in astronomy, physics, in literature, in history. And we bring in people from Stanford, from Harvard, from Dartmouth, from, of course, great Indian institutions, and leaders of big companies. Of course, people on our board we have brought in. But also, for example, later this week, we're going to have a former CEO of Nickelodeon, a woman named Geraldine Laybourne, who is on our international advisory board, who has smashed the glass ceiling for women in the cutthroat field of television business in the US. She's going to talk to our students in a chat kind of way, by name, and help mentor them so that you too can do what I did. So thank you for listening. And I know I'm a professor, so I go on and on, but glad that we've had this opportunity. And thank you to Kasturi Rangan for giving us NEP, which is kind of a license to ourselves engage in active learning, to innovate in education. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Barucha. That was very interesting. And I know we have had this conversation before. You were talking to me about how to ensure that, how to make sure that children keep asking those questions, why, and why not. And yes, that's the way I think. Then we all go to school and we forget to ask why. We are just told, like you said, that's probably dumbing down of our brain. There is a question for Professor Kasturi Rangan. Sir, this is an anonymous attendee and he wants to know what is the biggest obstacle when it comes to implementation of the NEP?
Well, first I want to tell that if you're talking of obstacles, the obstacle is, the fundamental thing is with respect to the obstacle in the mindset. The second is a culture which we have imbibed over years, which need transformational changes. These two elements to me are very critical in trying to make sure. And what you just now heard from the founder of Sai University and the Vice Chancellor clearly points out to the fact that they are outside both these issues. They have no mindset on this question. There is no cultural factors which dominate. Of course, there are issues. How do you deal with the new regulatory system, or how do you deal with the accreditation and all that? But if you take those out, they are determined to go the best way with respect to a route which is necessary to make this policy a success. So far as the success is concerned, multiple elements. Teacher is the central. So we need to make sure that we have the right type of teachers with the right type of knowledge, ability to prepare curriculum, ability to prepare pedagogy of their own. We have autonomy for all those things. We should make sure that there is an autonomy in this, in the actual implementation. With respect to the autonomy of the institutions also, we have laid down a certain set of criteria, not very elaborate, but good enough for the institution to take powers in their own hands to make sure that they do what is good for the institution. The third aspect is a question of the restructuring of the regulatory system. It has been made independent. In fact, one of the important things we have tried to do is to have the regulation, the accreditation, the grants giving, as well as the general professional standing. These are now separated out and they are independent. One of the problems we had in this kind of thing, many of them were overstepping their limits and stepping on the toes of the other. We have now separated out them, but at the same time, to have an integrated look throughout the regulatory system, we have a higher educational council, commission, higher education council, commission, which will oversee the totality of this. I think it's a very significant and important thing. It is, I understand this is going to go as a bill for this thing. National Higher Education, what you may commission is the other aspect of it. And then the various other aspects on the institutions with respect to the teachers. We have written down the necessary things, but what we are now seeing in the implementation is there are institutions which are moving at this. I have interacted with many of the institutions in this country, like IITs. Some of these are, of course, the higher end institutions, and one can easily see that they are able to make the transition because they understand what it means. There is a set of institution like the Central University, which also has got enough good faculty for them to take it forward. We need to address the questions of colleges. 40,000 of them are there in this country for higher education. How do you restructure them? We have again given a three-tier structure of research universities, teaching and research, as well as the college, autonomous colleges. We need to make sure that this is done. And lastly, always the question is whether I want to say that the government has been more than responsive with respect to adopt this particular policy, which is a very important criterion for the policy to succeed. I want to say this because at the highest level I have been interacting, and there is an all-round, not only seriousness about this, but they are also looking into the schedules and how do we do this. But if you want to do this, you need to have a change all across the level, various levels of the educational system. Some of them, the mindset and the culture and many other things are serious issue. We should not underrate this particular thing. There could be that you may not even make changes, which are very painful in this country to make changes, but they have to be done. So there are hard decisions, hard challenges, and these are the 5 or 6 elements which I said, which has to be scrupulously adopted. No buts and ifs, if I say too many, and then say that this, if they do this, then we have a success, then that is not an answer for you. All I can say is there is a number of institutions which have already started in the right track. And they are going to be the beacon for the success of this policy. And the others and some of the states have taken that up. I want to say not only the institutions, some of the states have adopted it. Keeping these, and they are willing to put any resources and change any culture to make sure that they succeed. They will be the success stories, and they will be then made to provide those kind of an experience, sharing them with others. We think this kind of an infectious way in which it will spread in the right direction and in the right way, rather than kind of a pandemic, is the one that we are looking for, which I think will happen. But the time frames for some of the things could be a little longer than what we have envisaged. Lastly, I also want to say with regard to the money, there is a 6% national GNP, which normally we have been talking about in terms of money. But 2.4, 2.5, it has been hovering around, and these are going up to 4. We have gone up to 6%, which is again a notional figure. And we are talking of a gross national expenditure of 20%. Currently, it is a 10% kind of a number. And these are the kind of numbers, but we need to look at how the resources are generated. We have supported public sector, government, public, and the private. We have put them on the same footing so far as the various regulatory and many aspects are concerned. We have also made sure in our policy that they can share resources, critical resources, so that investments in some of the newer private sector would not have to depend on further investments in terms of money. So these are some of the flexibilities that are available. We hope this, as I said, has only 2 broad elements. One, a determination and a change in the mindset. Second is the culture. Then we both are not easy in terms of a change, because you are talking of, but I think there is also a generational change that is happening. And this generational change coupled with this, I think will make the policy a success, because 10 years is a good enough time frame for the generation to change the country's course of a knowledge society. I don't think we can need this. We had the same worries about ISRO. But Sarabhai was scoffed at when he said that I want to fly rockets and put satellites. But he stuck to it. And in 60 years, you know what we have done. And the first 10 years. Second good thing for me is that there has been an all-round support for this policy. 80% of the 2.5 lakhs people who responded to this policy, they were for this policy. That is the tremendous support from the system, the society. Third aspect, the government is fully with you. There could not have been a better atmosphere. And then there is this determined leaders and visionaries who want to start around this policy a future for the education in this country. Sai stands right in the front of me in terms of this determination. I think these are the factors that will make it succeed. I am an optimist, and I am optimist not on the theoretical side through working in space. And I am sure that this will go the same way in terms of success and India becoming a preeminent nation in knowledge society.
Thank you, Professor. Yes, a lot of people have asked this question about how is it going to go forward. And there are questions from different states, actually. We have people come from Bihar, from Jharkhand, and quite a few people have asked how will the NEP be implemented in the Northeast region. So there have been specific questions from specific states. I don't know if you will be able to enunciate for each one of these states, but yes, you've done. You have spoken a lot about how the NEP will go forward, and plus the idea that it's going to be there for 10 years, or maybe you're going to give it 20 years. Yes, I know that the generations of students, and by then I think it will be already internalized, I guess. Most of our students would have internalized, and the teachers would have also internalized it. And it will be a successful run for the NEP. So now I have a question for you, sir. Um, when people, of course, you did mention it earlier that there is a sharing of resources between private and public institutions. Already it has started. So there was this question, a lot of people have asked, what happens, most of these students who do PhDs, they're not able to carry forward their, or take forward their PhD or research because institutions say they don't have funds. And how I know this is a very small thing because you're talking of the larger macro picture, but every one of them has micro, they're looking at it as a very small segment of what they are affected by. So I would like you to actually tell us whether it is even possible, especially the
Yes.
research scholars.
I think that's a good question because this is also, again, it is engage the attention of the committee. So for the specific reason I want to say, our research in the university system has been dismal over years. It has been highly unsatisfactory. 900 and odd universities, very few of them have excelled in research. Most of them have been put with suboptimal support, and there has been nothing worthwhile, not even sometimes fundamental research. And some papers can be published. And then to talk about applied research and translational research and in research for industrial outcome and so on and so forth. So they discussed this because we thought there is a mechanism to support university system, upgrade the research capabilities of university systems, and to make sure that each university has some strength or other with respect to some research areas. So this was one of the central theme on which we debated in quite a number of sittings. And we consulted, of course, some of the best experts in the country in this area of research. What we have done is that whereas we have the traditional supportive departments like the DST, DBT, the Earth Sciences, CSIR, and then of course the strategic department like space and atomic energy and DRDO and all that. But many of them have got a certain direction and certain restrictions. There is not restriction, certain limit, the bounds in which they operate. But that doesn't make really a dent into the number of researchers per lakh. If you really look at the number of patents, look at the number of the products that have been generated. If you look at these, among the emerging economies, we are one of the lowest in terms of the research outcome. So we have decided that we need to create a separate forum for this. We need to create a professional research body which will create research capabilities, which will review research capabilities, which will establish the dynamic changes to the system depending on what the needs are, work closely with other institutions, including industry. So create a body which will support university in creating this kind of an environment for them to start research. This is the National Research Foundation, which we have recommended. The National Research Foundation, even though it is all-encompassing, it covers both the universities and others, it is primarily meant for research, for the universities. Creation of centers of excellence in universities through research. We have given a tremendous operational details with regard to the flexibility that we can bring to bear, including veteran research who are not already retired, how to bring them back and support the establishment of this. The question of covering research in all the facets of knowledge. It is not only science and engineering, humanities, the social sciences, even finally, of course, all the other areas like engineering and so on. So it will be a holistic body in terms of supporting research. It will also make sure that it will get the research funding through a professional method of peer reviewing and things of that kind. So all that important rules of the game that is needed with respect to a successful national research program has been built into the National Research Foundation. And this National Research Foundation has been recognized as a part of the policy and even outside the policy, I should say, because last year, our finance minister allocated 50,000 crores for the National Research Foundation for the next 5 years. The mechanics of how do you want to do it is under discussion. What kind of systems we'll have, But we think we will have a centralized system of overseeing and establishment and expertise, but spread over in terms of a research activity and a very close monitoring of the outcomes, and also to ensure a success of a fourfold stage of research. Success in pure research, that is important because you create knowledge. Success in applied research, because some of them will be applicable for a variety of purposes, social and non-social. Then third is with respect to translational. It's not good enough that you demonstrate something, you need to convert it into a product. Translational, and finally, industrial or other kinds of outcomes, which will really serve the outcome of the research in terms of tangible benefits. So these are already put into place. We hope in the universities will start. And we also, one important thing I would like to make before I close this discussion, that is we have made sure the National Research Foundation will support both the private as well as the public institutions. So no private institution will be denied research grants from the National Research Institute Foundation simply because they belong to the private sector, which it will be a part of the whole thing. So we have to give this kind of a support, and I think it will be the solution, but it's going to take a little time. But certainly, depending on the priority, we can assign, and also the scientists who support it and try to come forward with. I think it will be a good step towards taking India into a research ecosystem power, if I want to call it that way.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much. That was very interesting. And I'm glad you said that we're going to have an NRF that is actually going to support both private and public institutions, but that there will be an overarching peer review system which will assess every institution or every research output that comes from every institution. Am I right?
Right, you're right.
Thank you very much, sir. And now, Mr. Ramani, there is a question for you here. One person wanted to know, what is your idea, what is your thoughts on the academic credit bank system, academic bank of credit system, ABC, that the UGC has brought in? So would your institution comply with the requirement?
I would answer it in a few words, but I would pass it on later to Professor who's more qualified to answer an academic credit system. But my point is very simple. The system is welcome. Basically, because it gives you flexibility to move from one discipline to another, one institution to another, one subject to another. It doesn't bind a student to a discipline, a course, or an institute. And it gives the student a lot of flexibility in their life to move from one to the other. So that is what is all about, liberal, in terms of liberal education is concerned. Even if the student has made a mistake in selecting a subject, let's say in undergraduate year 2, they want to move and say that, okay, I want to change my major, I want to change my minor. It gives them opportunities to make those changes as they go along. They're not stuck for 4 years. So in my view, any credit transfer system, from institution point of view, from a discipline point of view, from a student point of view, is a very welcome change to the current system. Where everything is watertight jackets in silos. We operate in silos in discipline, silos in universities, silos in colleges, and, subjects and teachers and credits are all limited within that silo. So any change to break away from the silos to be widespread is very, very welcome. But I think another perspective, an academic perspective, would be more interesting for Professor Barucha to address this question.
May I just make one point? I,
Yes,
of course, support the spirit of that proposal because of the obvious flexibility it provides. I have one concern about it, which is I hope it does not force then all institutions to adopt the same kind of curriculum in order to serve this ability to transfer laterally and transfer credits. That's my one concern. I would really, really hope that the policymakers think that through. The European Union has gone through this, and I think there are many, many positive and not so positive lessons to be learned by that. So because right now what the NEP is enabling us is to have 1,000 flowers bloom. Let's have Sai University. Let's have this. They may have a slightly different model. That's how innovation comes about. People try different things, and the marketplace of ideas will will decide, in 10 to 20 years. If we have the credit bank that allows students to transfer seamlessly from one university to another, I just hope that doesn't mean that they all have to develop lockstep curricula to make sure that they can transfer and have all the right. That would be, I seriously urge those who are going to implement it to take a really deep dive into that issue.
Thank you, sir. So there is a question here. Lots of people have asked this. There's one person who's asked this question. In Gujarat, there is a university that provides free education in many technical education units, along with free library access, etc. Finland provides free education on AI to all European nations, as well as many other futuristic technologies. So there are nations that are helping economic growth. Their education institutions and CSRs after getting placed in good companies. Now, all this is possible because of the best input in education and practical education. I think he says that there should be lots more practical education, which is missing in our education system. And I think Professor Kasturi Rangan was the one who actually told us that there will be a total transformation. Am I right, sir?
What does it mean by practical education? What is this?
I understand what I mean by.
Is it vocal education, vocational education?
No, I think he means practicals in colleges where you hands-on practice in college.
You see,
for instance, in science.
Okay. No, there is quite the experiential learning runs all across the policy. Let it be very clear. It is not going to be only for early childhood education or things like that. We have tried to make sure that the experiential, except of course, the later stages of a hardcore theoretician who doesn't want to enter the laboratory or not. So I am not talking about the type of the people like Wolfgang Pauli and others who walking across the laboratory itself will shoot off many equipments in the laboratory. That kind of not the people. But by and large, the experiential learning is critical with respect to school, undergraduate education, and a substantial postgraduate education. How you convert that into the research area will depend on what research programs you have and work with the various laboratories with that kind of a thing. I think this educational policy provides enough opportunity for the experiences that you need in the practical domain. That is something which is there. For example, when Sai University has something with respect to a fund area, they will make sure whether you do it through that university or with a national facility or any other kind of mechanism, you will certainly do this with respect to a practical experience which you need for that. So that is available today. So that is not an issue at all. Finland giving a free education and many other things. Our country is big. We are talking of a few million people, which is 1.36 billion people. And we have, but you should say, we have schemes financially so attractive that only those part of the scheme exceeds the totality of the Finland expenditure on education. You should understand that is the kind of a thing, if you ask me, in terms of the scales we are talking. I myself have heard directly from Dr. Ramani how he will make sure that some student who needs an education but is not able to afford it financially, he will make sure, in fact, he can elaborate it. He has a vision for even for that kind of a thing. So I think every institution, I hope, thinks on the lines in which Dr. Ramani told me that he would like to support those kind of a thing. So I don't think we are in trouble because of this. There are enough types of mechanisms in this country too. And a lot of youngsters who go abroad, they get funding only from not from the government or from their parents. They get it from other sources. You should know that in this country itself. Sorry.
Thank you, sir. So, Mr. Ramani, would you just explain what your university is planning to do for students who actually are looking for scholarships or financial support?
Number one, I must say, the governing principle is that education as a service that defines that we are not out here to make quick buck and take away money home and individuals. The whole idea is to serve this country and its people, especially the younger generation, to the best of our ability. We know that we're all having enough emissions, and we're going to be leaving the next the 2 generations or 3 generations with enough carbon emissions. Unfortunately, we're not going to give a good planet back to our children and grandchildren. But at least we can give them a good education system on which the future generation will think that, okay, our forefathers, our generation, our parents, our grandparents left behind us a huge legacy of education, because of which the students and their children and grandchildren will benefit. Somebody has to plant a seed, which will become a plant and then grow and then become a giant tree. So today, Professor Kasturi Rangan has planted the seed. We are trying to do our best to put some manure, put some water around it, make it to grow to a plant. And the future generation will make sure a giant tree or a forest comes out of it. So in this process, that we have to understand there are several stakeholders. There are faculty, the students, the parents, the institutions, there are the government bodies, so on and so forth. But in principle, in Sai University, a student is given utmost preference in the university. In a sense, what he said is that economic criteria or social criteria will not deprive a good student of higher education. That's an assurance. If you are economically backward, or if you're socially backward, or if you're physically challenged, or whatever else there is that, today's lot of inequality in our society. If you're coming from a disadvantaged sector of society and you're a good student, assume you're a good student, that you're not going to be deprived of education on any of those grounds. In fact, you give preference to those students because we are considering our duty to educate the younger generation. And I believe it's our duty to make sure education is service, and that money will not be the consideration to prevent them from getting good quality education. And let me flip it once. This is the same country. While we're trying to do this, on the other hand, the same country where, in our newspapers, we proudly say that, oh yes, this year United States has granted 55,000 visas for students to come to the US. It's never been done before. Why are we proud of it? That 55,000 students going to US means approximately each US university costs 25 to 30 lakhs per year. We are spending 13,000 crores, 13,000 plus crores of rupees each year to fund the US universities. Do you realize the magnitude of what I'm saying? And how is this money going? The money is going from middle-class parents, perhaps, who have the ability to either pay for it or take a loan from some institution and educate the children for, let's say, 4 years or 6 years. See, the amount is it's a colossal national, divestment. The same amount of money, if you have to just invest in this country in infrastructure, just imagine the dividends we'll get. We'll be able to educate maybe 100 times or 1,000 times more number of students. So same point. We say that this is the country where most of the developed countries have their annual fair recruiting students from India, from every continent. They come and conduct student fairs. Earlier, our students used to go abroad for PG. Now they're going for undergraduate education. Doesn't it show there's something wrong with the system? So on one side, we have parents who are either able to, they have the ability or the ability to borrow and send their children abroad for higher education. On the other side, we possibly have, students and parents who cannot even educate these children in the current situation in the country within our own system, unless, of course, they go to an institution which offers a low cost of education and possibly not adequate quality. So what we're saying Sai University will stand is we will provide, as an assurance that I'm saying as a founding person, Chancellor of this university, Sai University will provide the highest quality of education in India And within a few years, we'll be providing the quality of education comparable to the best university in the world. And second, we'll make sure that any deserving student, especially those from disadvantaged parts of society, will be given a preference in our process and admissions and selection and so on, to see that we achieve our purpose of providing education as a service. I hope that answers your question. That means there's a generous amount of scholarships, a scholarship based on merit, scholarship based on need, scholarship based on actually, I can tell you that the parent trust which is promoting Sai University currently is giving 3,000 children scholarship each year. We do it silently, nobody knows in the world because we don't publicize it. We are already giving 3,000 scholarships to students for the last 23 years. So what we're now trying to do is to channelize all of that into building a great university where all of this will happen for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I think we are almost almost at the end of our session.
A couple of points, perhaps we should ask Professor Rangan on the NEP point, especially the higher education system, the key points about how to the three types of higher education institutions they have designed, and possibly the regulatory mechanism in the higher education system and the technology. Some of those are critical points of higher education which has not been able to speak about.
Professor Kasturi Rangan, would you like to answer this question, sir?
Yeah, I think what Dr. Ramani mentioned, one is on the restructuring of the higher education. You know, we have, as I told, a proliferation of a number of institutions in the higher education. I think if I remember correctly, nearly 40,000 colleges, then about 1,000 universities and things of that kind. And many of them are working suboptimal. And you don't get the right type of resources on one side. And if you have to really have a higher education with quality, that is not the kind of configuration that we have. So we considered this aspect. We try to see what is the best. So we, in the process, try to create a structure for the higher education where there are few universities, maybe 100 or 200 in the next 20, 25 years, which will have research as a major part of it, but 50% will be still teaching. And this will have something like, the number will be anywhere up to 10,000 to 20,000 kind of students. They will have a holistic approach. They will have the necessary provision for holistic education, because you will have several departments catering to several areas of education. So this is and the research will be one of the most prominent. The easiest example I can say with respect to a higher education with research is the one like Stanford or MIT. And this is exactly what Sai University straight away in putting as a goal. That's where I really admire them, that they have set a goal of that kind and not too distant future, as early as we can expect from this kind of a speed with which they are working. The second, of course, is the teaching university. Again, a large number of students running into 20,000, but the number of universities will be about 2,000, 3,000, or even 5,000 of them. And this will provide high quality education, research, but research will be a part of it, because research and the teaching has to go so far as the quality element is concerned. And so this is the second level. And there will be a large number of autonomous degree giving colleges. They give you the undergraduate degree. The provisions of the undergraduate degree is something which I said is broadly in the direction of the undergraduate education policy, which you have enunciated. And they will also provide, where possible, teacher education, which is a very important part of the higher education. I did not mention it earlier. The teacher education has been now moved into higher education for two reasons. One is it improves the stature of the teacher itself, even though they may be teaching in high school or other places. They come from a higher education institution, not from a TEIs. And the second one is the fact that there is a large depth and breadth of knowledge resident in this kind of institution, which the teachers have to take advantage, then only they can do justice to a quality school education. So this is the other part of it. So there are three levels. So we have recommended that in the next step by 2020, I think it's in 10 years kind of a thing, we want the transformation of most of these universities to take place into these three levels. So far as the regulation is concerned, you know, I did mention about the fact that there has been a lot of overlap in the roles of the various types of education. So the question of higher age regulation, question of accreditation, degree granting, rather grants giving, and ultimately higher education grants council, these four verticals have been created as a part of a higher education council of India. So that is the other part of higher education. So
Please continue, sir.
this is the other part of it. So we think that in a sense, this will bring down the level of cross-talking that is happening, and that makes the system also highly inefficient. And so we are trying to correct that particular thing. And of course, we are now in the process of near finalization of the National Higher Education Qualification Network, the framework, which is underway, and more or less it is complete. On the technology on the education, certainly technology can be always transformative. You know what happened in space, agriculture, and many other kind of a thing. So technology certainly mediates human activity. The second, nothing can replace or even partially substitute the centrality of human relations. This is the most important thing we have recognized. So as education is fundamentally a process of human relationship between the student and the teacher. Thus, things as technology can help in this process. If used thoughtfully, it can be detrimental. If it cannot be used thoughtfully, then it can be detrimental. Third aspect is the usefulness of technology in education. See, one thing, there was a lot of hype that technology will drive the education and everything will come centered around technology. If you today look at the real situation with regard to this, I think it is not that kind of a hype, is not fully justified today. So it is certainly a supportive element, but not the element. Then ultimately, I would also like to say that we have recommended the establishment of a National Educational Technology Forum. The technology selection and its application in education has its own uniqueness. We cannot, as you take a technology which is developed, for example, for a business purpose, and then try to adopt it for education, because it is suboptimal and sometimes it could be misleading in terms of an efficiency of an education system. So we have recommended the National Education Technology Forum with the mandate to provide independent, evidence-based advice to central and state government agencies on technology-based interventions, build intellectual and institutional capacities in educational technology, and envision strategic thrust and article for new direction. So this is what I would say is the three elements which I wanted to place before all of you. Before I conclude, I would like to say something about, after interacting with the Sai University and the kind of planning that they have already explained through both Dr. Ramani and Professor Barucha, I would like to reiterate something which is really the most encouraging part of the vision that Sai University has unfolded, and they are already on the job with regard to this. First, is aiming to become an international university. They have no ambiguity at all on this question of becoming an international university from India. Sai University has included many unique features of NEP in the programs. I have discussed this. I have felt it. They are explaining from their side. They have really seen what are the areas in which the NEP directly conforms to the kind of plans they have. Third aspect is the first university in India to offer B.Tech in computing and data science, with the undergraduate ecosystem that is integrated with liberal arts. That's very interesting. The first time, and I'm not aware of this in anywhere else, but this is a very significant step towards demonstrating the integration of various aspects of education into a multidisciplinary. Flexibility in curriculum, truly interdisciplinary, that is another aspect of it. Implement a continuous assessment instead of few high stakes. This is formative and summative has been one of the key discussions in the policy. And I'm very happy to see that you're going to implement continued assessment instead of few high stakes exam with the bane of the present examination system. Emphasis on multidisciplinary, collaborative student practice. The Vice Chancellor beautifully summarized this aspect of it. I thought before I conclude my remarks, I should certainly mention these things because I think these are very significant steps that Sai University is taking in the context of the initiatives of the NEP and also the allied elements. Thank you.
Professor Kasturi Rangan, I think we have run really short time. We have to conclude. You've done all the concluding remark on my behalf.
My God.
But then it was so interesting. The entire session was very interesting and extremely enlightening, because I have been speaking only with professors and institutional heads and vice chancellors who all had complaints, who had problems, who were worried that they would not be able to take forward the NEP, although the UGC, right now that's the only regulatory body. And so they have been saying that it is going to be a struggle. We don't know how we are going to take all teachers and students forward, given that the way the education system is in our country. But I think you've made such excellent points that I believe that I can actually go tell them that you don't have to worry, that the entire NEP is there. It's going to take you all on board when you go forward. Thank you very much, sir, for your time.
Thank you, Sujata.
Thank you, Professor Barucha. Thank you, Mr. Ramani. Thank you.
Thank
very
you,
much
Professor
all.
Kasturangan, and of course, the Sujata, Tyagbu, and the rest of the Hindu team for making this learning experience and through this webinar. I am sure that we have been enlightened. I'm sure that the people who are watching this webinar have been enlightened. And I will only say that whatever we talked about today in NEP and Sai University, you will see that it's going to be a dream come true to India. We will make that happen in Sai University. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good. Thank you. That's nice.